Okay, let's put a parental rig on this. I'm going to close this window up real quick. And then let's hit Alt-A. Now I want to select every object on the head with the head selected last. So left-click the hat, hold down Shift and left-click all of the other objects. And then the head last, so it turns yellow. It's the active object. Now we can hit Control P and we can set the parent to that head object while keeping our transformations for the other objects. Let's left click the head so it's the only one selected and hit RZ. And we can see that the head moves, everything on the head moves with it the way it's supposed to. I'm going to left click and hit Control Z just to undo that movement. All right, cool. Let's actually do the body. So I'm going to left click the arm, Shift left click all of the buttons, Shift left click the other arm, and then Shift left click the body last so it's yellow because it's the active object. We'll hit Control and P at the same time and we'll pick Object, Keep Transform. Okay, we don't really have to do anything to the snowball on the bottom. Let's hit Alt-A. And then let's add an empty. If we hit Shift-A, we'll add an empty, plane axis empty. I'm going to use my gizmo, or you could use GZ to bring it up to about the first button. We'll see these kind of whiskers hanging out. So let's leave that there, and let's select the head, then Shift left-click the body, Shift left-click the lowest snowball, and then Shift left-click the empty itself. Now we can hit Control and P at the same time, and we can set the parent to Object and keep the transformations. Now if we select the empty, I selected the ground, and then just try again, you'll get the empty. We can see that if I move it along the X, GX, the entire snowman moves. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that movement. So it in fact works. All of our parts are working the way they're supposed to. We can turn the head and all the objects will stay in where they're supposed to in relationship to the head. We can turn the body, turn everything, and everything looks pretty good. Okay, so we have our snowman rigged up and ready to animate. I'm going to hit 0 on the numpad to go into camera view. And then let's go and take him back over to this far corner back here. So let's hit GX to take him over to the side. I'm going to hit GY to take him to the back a little more. And then GX one more time probably to bring him over here. Excuse me. All right, let's hit, first maybe let's lower his arms. I'm going to select that arm, RY to lower it just a little bit. Let's select the other arm, RY just a little bit, and we'll call that good. Let's grab the empty again. I'm going to hit RZ in order to turn him kind of going the way we want. Okay, so there's where he's going to start off. Let's pull up the timeline down below here. We're starting at frame 1 right here, and we'll end at frame 250, which will give us about 8 seconds of film. We can see start 1, end 250. Another thing we can do is go right over here to our render settings. Let's click this one that looks like a printer, the output settings, and then let's go down here where it says frame rate. It probably was at 24. Let's set it to 30. Just make sure it says 30. Okay, cool. So he's here on frame 1. The empty is controlling the entire snowman. So we need to do the big movements first. So that'll be everything to do with this empty. So the empty will be here on frame 1. So let's give it a keyframe. If we hover inside this camera view and hit I, we can leave a location rotation keyframe. And if you get lost, we're only doing location rotation keyframes on this project. So, okay, cool. So I'm figuring he's going to go from here over here somewhere. And then he's going to make a turn and come up here to the front, maybe off center. And so I think he'll take about 3 seconds to get to this position here, which would be about 90 seconds. However, we're going to leave a keyframe somewhere, maybe about halfway, so somewhere in this zone. So that's probably at around frame 60. So I'm going to go to frame 60, and then I'm going to move the snowman over. We can use this red arrow to move him over if we want, to maybe about halfway. And then we can hit GY to move him a little closer to the camera because he's kind of heading towards us. Okay, right here for the empty, which we have selected, we're going to hit I for location rotation. Now he's going to come over to this position here at frame 90. So let's come right over here. So the scrubber's at frame 90. Now I can drag him over here a little bit and hit GY and bring him a little bit closer. Okay, and then somewhere in there. And then we're going to need him to rotate a little bit right here as well. So let's hit R, Z, and we'll have him rotate kind of towards us like this. And then we need a keyframe, so we'll hit I, location rotation. If we left click this scrubber, we can take it back and see what he does. He comes from the back. As we hit frame 60, his body and everything starts turning a little bit till he gets to this position at frame 90. That looks pretty good to me. All right, and so now what we want to do is we want to figure out what frame he's going to be at when he finishes and stops. So let's go to frame 150 is where I believe that'll happen. But halfway, maybe around 130, we're going to need to put him somewhere over here where he's not quite to the end, and we're going to need to leave a keyframe. So let's move him over, and then GY, so he comes up forward. So he's about halfway maybe. Let's move him over a little bit like this. And then we'll have to leave a keyframe, I, for location rotation. And then we're going to rotate him. Actually, let's hit Control Z to undo that keyframe because we should have rotated him too. So let's hit R, Z, and we'll turn him kind of like this. Now let's leave the keyframe, I, location rotation. All right, so if we go back, we see he comes around, and then his body makes a full kind of rotation towards where he's going. Now we'll change his head movement here in a little bit too once we get him where he's going. Okay, so now let's move forward to frame 150, which is where he stops, and we'll move him forward with the GY, something like so. And then I'm going to move him over. We could use the red X, the X axis, and we'll move him just slightly over like so. And then I'm going to rotate him on the Y. I'm going to Control Z that, obviously, and we're going to rotate him on the Z, RZ. That did not look right. And we're going to face him kind of looking forward. All right, let's leave a keyframe, I, location rotation. All right, if we go back in the video, we can see that he starts in the back. He makes the turn, and then he comes up to this first position, or the final position where he's going to end. All right, let's go back and control his head a little bit. I think somewhere back here, maybe at frame 8, no, maybe frame 75, he's going to start turning his head. So let's go back to frame 60, select his head, so it's yellow. Let's hit I for keyframe, location rotation, and then we'll move forward to where he's in this turn. And then let's make his head turn towards where he's going to look by hitting R, Z. Something like that, maybe. And then let's hit I for location rotation. Let's grab the scrubber and move him forward. Now he's in this position, somewhere in here around frame 130 like we did before. Let's rotate his head on the Z, RZ, so he looks more towards where he's going. Something like this. We'll hit I to leave a keyframe for location and rotation. Then we'll move him to 150, where we'll finally give him a little bit of rotation on the Z, RZ, and we'll have him looking not quite dead at us. Something like that. I, location rotation. All right, now let's scrub back and see what his body does. So as he comes in here, he's looking pretty good, but he doesn't really turn. So let's come right here, for his body, and we're going to grab the body snowball and the lower snowball at the same time. We're going to hit I, location, rotation. So that's on around frame 86 or so. You pick, it's in there somewhere. And then as we move him forward to this other position at frame 130, yeah, it looks like he turns. We want his, let's come just a little bit further, like say frame 95, and let's go R, Z, and turn his whole body towards where he's going to go. And then we'll hit I, location, rotation. And then when he comes into this next position at frame 130, his body needs another turn. R, Z, we can straighten it up more with his body. It won't be an exact alignment with his head. And then let's leave a keyframe, I, location, and rotation. And then we'll move forward to frame 150 where he ends, and we'll turn his body just a little more. R, Z, maybe bring it something like that. We'll have to leave a keyframe, I, location, and rotation. Okay, so I think his animation is looking pretty fair. He's coming from the back. He's looking where he's going. His body makes the turn. As he hits the halfway mark, his head and body are kind of turning towards the final position. And then there he is at frame 150. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so we have him at 150 at his ending spot. We've got a keyframe for our empty there. So let's make him wave. So let's select the his right arm, and then let's give it a keyframe, I, to insert a location rotation. And then we're going to move forward, say 10 or so, and then let's hit RY to make it go up to the highest position that it would be in the wave. Let's hit I, location, rotation. Let's go another 10 or so. They don't have to be perfect. They probably shouldn't be perfect. RY down I to insert location, rotation, keyframe. Again, RY up to the top, somewhere like so. I, location, rotation. Another, 8 or 10 forward. RY, I to insert a location, rotation, keyframe. Again, somewhere in there. RY. Let's hit I for a location, rotation, keyframe. And then let's hit, say, one more down to the bottom. Let's go RY, and we'll call that the last one. We'll hit I, location, rotation. Okay, so we've got all those keyframes for our wave. He stops, he waves a bit. Okay, all right, now let's make the movements for the other arm. So right at the beginning here at frame 150, let's grab the other arm, I for location, rotation, keyframe, and then let's move forward. As that other arm gets to the top of the wave, somewhere in there, this arm's going to go down slightly. So we're going to go RY, and we're only going to move it just slightly, and then hit I, location, rotation, keyframe. We're going to go this way till it goes to the bottom, and then this one's going to go up slightly. We're just going to do the slightly a bit of the opposite each time. So I'm going to hit I, location, rotation. We're going to move again once the arm's at its highest position. This other arm is going to go down slightly, RY. Let's hit I to insert a location keyframe. A little bit further, there's the bottom of that wave. This one's going to go up a little, RY. I, location, and rotation. Let's go a little further once that one's up at the top. This one's going to go down, RY, just slightly. And then let's leave a keyframe, I, location, rotation. And then let's go over here where it's the last wave, and we'll bring that arm down just a little bit, RY. Let's hit I for location, rotation, keyframe. Okay, that looks pretty good. So right here, I want to make sure that we have a keyframe for our empty. Actually, let's do the head first. So before he takes off, he's going to come rushing off the screen this way, and he's going to move pretty fast because we only have a little bit of time left. So let's grab the head, and let's hit a keyframe I, location, rotation. That says that this keyframe and this keyframe are the same. That's what this yellow line is. And we need it at 2000, frame 207 to be right here for sure. So we've hit a keyframe. Let's go a little bit further. It doesn't take very long to turn your head. And let's hit RZ. And he's going to look over this way to see which way he's going to go. Let's hit I, location, rotation. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now he's going to turn his body, which is the top and the bottom. So we select the chest, shift select the bottom snowball. We hit I to insert a location rotation keyframe. And then we move just a little bit further to frame, say, 218 or so. And then I'm going to hit RZ to rotate those to line up kind of with the head. And then let's hit I, location, rotation. Okay, so let's select the empty. Now the empty, he turns his head, turns his body, and right here at frame 220, we need to leave a keyframe to say that the empty for sure has to be at this place. So let's hit I, location, rotation, and now we have that empty. Now if we go forward, he doesn't move at all. But if we go forward to the end of the clip, and by the way, we can just use our scroll wheel to shrink this in a bit. When he's at the end of the clip, now we're going to move him off the screen. So as I scroll wheel back out here, we can actually say that he wants to move over here somewhere. So we can go GX, and then we can go GY, and then GX just to move him over. I just want him barely out of the screen. So if I come in here close, you can see his hand is almost still in the screen. Okay, cool. So let's leave a keyframe right there. I, location, and rotation. All right, so now if we go back to the video and play it, we see that he comes up, he stops, he waves, he turns, and then he zips off. Okay, that's looking pretty fair. Let me get in closer here so we can just watch it one more time. I'm going to minimize the timeline. Scroll it in here. All right, one more time we'll watch the video. All right, it looks pretty good. Okay, so before we render this out as a finished video, let's put a dynamic paint effect on the ground, which will make it look like the snowman's leaving an actual trail through the snow. Now, in order to do that, I had to apply the modifiers that are on our ground. So you simply left-click them, hit your modifiers. I've already added that stuff on there. All you have to do is hit the apply button and apply them in order, and you have to be in object mode, but it's very easy. You just hit apply. I have this on here because I was messing around in between, but yours should say displacement and subdivision surface modifier, and you simply just push apply and apply them in the order, and you'll get to where we are here. Sorry about that. I saved and it just wouldn't let me go back. So anyways, very easy. Hit the wrench and apply it for this effect to work in the final render. Okay, so with the ground's modifiers applied, let's move on. All right, so I'm going to grab the ground. We're going to hit the physics tab here, and we're going to add on a dynamic paint. So you'll see the selection dynamic paint. Once you select it, it'll ask, do you want to add a canvas? And yes, we do for the ground. And right here it says, do you want to add this canvas? And we do, so let's click it. Once we do that, we have this canvas here. And then if we come down here, we have to maybe open up surface. If you click the little arrow by surface, you'll get this surface type. And we want to put in paint. We want to click it and go down to displace. So let's left click displace. So surface, you have to open up surface type, displace. Otherwise, that's all you have to do here. Just add a canvas, make sure its surface type is set to displace, and you're good to go. Now let's make the snowball, the lowest snowball, if we left click it, we can add its dynamic paint effect, which will be a brush. So if it says canvas here, you can just click it and pick brush. And then right here it says add brush, so let's click and add a brush. And then we don't have to do anything else to this. So now if we play the video, we'll see that the snowman actually is carving a trail through the snow as well. And it just adds a little bit of, a little bit more coolness to it. All right, so I'm going to stop that, go back to the beginning of the video, and then I'm going to select the ground, and then we're going to go back in here where it says, to the bottom where it says cache. We're going to open up the cache by hitting the little arrow, and then it's going to have these options bake. Now, if these are all blurred out or blackened out, it's because you haven't saved yet, and hopefully you were saving. I haven't been telling people to save during this video. It's kind of an assumption. But if you get to a place right here where it says looks like it's all disabled, it's just because it won't allow you to save anything in there if you haven't saved the file. So if you have that problem, then make sure you go back and save. And remember, save regularly. Okay, so now what I can do is we can hit this one that says Bake All Dynamics. If I left click it, it just ran right through it really fast on my computer anyways, and it just baked all that to a small cache that'll make our render easier to do. So let's hit it and see what it does. So this is what the video looks like now, and it'll render a lot faster because of that save. So I'm going to stop, and we'll call that good. All right, so let's move on to the render portion of this. Real quick, what we're going to do is I'm going to move the scrubber about to the middle of the video where the snow guy's right up in front. Let's click the Eevee render engine controls right here with the back of this camera. If you hover over it, you'll see that it says render properties. I've changed my render. Yours was probably 64, I think. I'm changing the render samples to 150. So make sure it says 150 where it says render here. And also make sure we're in the Eevee render engine. We turned on ambient occlusion earlier. If we open it, we'll see it's to its default setting. I'm just going to leave it there. Let's click it. We're not going to use bloom, depth of field, subsurface scattering, or any of that kind of stuff. We already turned on screen space reflections, which all we had to do was put a check in this box. There's nothing to change here for us. We're not going to be using motion blur, volumetrics. We don't have any hair from a particle system in our scene. Shadows, if we left click and open it, I changed the cube size here. It said 512 before, but where it says cube size, let's click it and make sure it says 2048. So 2048. Soft shadows was on by default, but I think we also added high bit depth. If it's not checked, please check it now. Let's close that up. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is go down to color management. If I left click on that, I can see where we come down to look. It says none by default. If I click on it, I'm going to go to medium high contrast. So let's just click that. That'll give us more contrast. And then I'm going to go down to this bottom one that says use curves. Let's put a checkbox in it and then open its box. And we'll see we get this maybe familiar curves control panel. This is pretty common in a lot of software. All I'm going to do is right here in this place where all these lines converge, I'm going to put a dot there by left clicking. And then I'm going to move it up just slightly. And then I'm going to come down here about where these ones do on this line and left click. And then I'm going to move this one back a bit. And we can see what that did was that gave us a lot more contrast in our scene, which I think looks a lot better. And then when we did that, our ambient occlusion was kind of high. So if we go back to the top up here and go to our ambient occlusion, we might want to take that down just a little bit, maybe 0.6 or so. Looks pretty good. 0.6 or 0.5 looks better for our render scene. Hopefully that jet passing overhead isn't too much of a nuisance to our video. Okay, cool. So we have it looking pretty good. Let's take a still image of what our render would look like right now. Let's click it and let's click it and hit render image. Okay, so it looks not too bad. If I look up here, one of the issues I've been having with the Eevee render engine is light leak, and there's a little bit under the hat here. So if we X out by hitting up here in the upper right corner of the X, and let's check our light real quick. If I left click my light's beam, I'll select my light, or I can come up here in my scene collection organizer and click it here. That's the only way I can get this icon. And then if I come down here where it says shadows, we want to make sure that this has a check on it, which it would from our render engine from our earlier selection. But I have to open this arrow to get this bias. And then I'm going to kick this bias up to say I don't know, 1.5 or so, somewhere in there, maybe a little more. Let's kick it up. Let's kick the whole thing up to say 4 or so. I found that kind of helps to blur out some of the weird anomalies that I've been getting up under the hat and places like that. And it works pretty good for this scene. We still get a little bit of shadow, but they're not all, kind of messy looking. And then when we render the video, a lot of times those things make these weird flashing anomalies that don't look good. Okay, so yeah, we just turn the bias up to around 4. Probably doesn't even need to be that high. You could, in some scenes, put contact shadows, but I found that also leaves weird artifacts that I don't really care for. So I'm not going to hit that either. All right, cool. If we go back to our Eevee render engine, we've got everything here in alignment. So let's go to this one that looks like a printer, which is our output properties. If we go in here, we can see that this is where we can set the resolution. Right now it's a 1920 by 1080. You could make this 4K, no problem. Frame start is 1, end is 250. We set the frame rate to 30 frames per second, so we don't need to change any of that. Just make sure it says 30 here. And then right down here in this output, there's this long box right here. If you click this file folder next to it, it'll allow you to select a folder to put the video in. So that's up to you where you put that. I usually put mine on my desktop, as you can see. Just name it, and then right here you can assign where this video is going to go. So make sure you remember where you're sending this video, okay? And then down here in the bottom, if we left click this, I'll turn it back to PNG, because this is probably what it looks like by default. I kind of was messing around in here. By default, it's a PNG, and that's simply because during a render in the Cycles render engine that may take a couple of days, this is just going to fire off a bunch of photographs, essentially. And so if the power goes out or you're interrupted, you can always go back to the photo, the PNG, that was rendered last, and start again from there. In a video file format, if the power goes out and all that kind of stuff, your video is basically ruined. So on long renders, PNG image sequence is what you want. For our project, though, we're going to pick AVI JPEG, and that's simply because the Eevee render engine renders so fast. This is going to be a 10 or 12 second or 10 or 12 minute render, not seconds. That would be awesome. But no, 10 or 12 minutes is what this is going to take, and I'll have to do it again if the power goes out. It's not that big of a deal. So in short renders, we can pick that one. It says we're going to have a color image with a quality of 90%. So to recap, make sure you assign something right here as to the place your video is going to go. We changed it to AVI JPEG. Everything else up here was pretty much the same. We did change it to 30 frames per second. Okay, with that said, I think we're ready to render. We have a place for our video to go. We've set our settings to look a certain way. Now let's render it. So I'm going to go render, render animation. Now it'll start rendering. It'll take a second or two to start showing. And then it'll show us this cool preview of our snow scene. And it looks pretty good. It should be rendering with the trail in the snow. We got pretty good contrast. It looks like a cartoon snowman scene. The sky maybe isn't very cartoony, but I think it adds kind of a neat effect. All right, so we can see up here in the upper left, we got frame 8. We're already on frame 8, and it's taking 2.9 seconds or so on my machine to render these. It's pretty common that as the snow person gets closer and the scene changes a little bit, for the render time per frame to go up a little bit. Like right now, it's already up to 3 seconds. I haven't seen any of these simple cartoon scenes really get on my computer up above 3 or 4 seconds per frame, so it's pretty fast rendering. All right, I'll come back when the render's done, and we'll get this thing over. Okay, so here's the final video. Let's go for it. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to just back it up a little bit. I think it looks pretty good. We could definitely work on it. You know the basics now. This has just been a very basic project. So hopefully you've learned a lot. I really appreciate you watching this tutorial, and please check me out again. I'm going to have a lot of cool tutorials coming out, and maybe consider subscribing if you like. Thanks again for watching.